We invite you to join us every Tuesday evening from 7:30 p.m. as we embark on a most needed quest to remove the tentacles of corruption from our systems. See you then for our latest program called Governance, Corruption, and Justice.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I'm your hostess, editor at Kaieteur Radio's Guyana, and joining us this evening is international lawyer and staunch advocate for the environment, Ms. Melinda Janke. Ms. Janke, welcome to tonight's program.
Guyana, thank you very much. It's always good to be on the program, and good evening to all of your viewers and listeners. Lovely to be back.
All right, thank you. So we have about 45 minutes to about an hour to use up at this point. So I'll get right into our questions for tonight. Now, on the matter of climate change, we've seen a posture from the government, particularly from our Vice President, Mr. Barrett Jagdeo, and from the President, Mr. Irfan Ali, that when it comes to climate change, Guyana has had to suffer from the effects of this phenomenon for years, even though it has not been a major contributor to it. And those who are the main contributors to it, they have promised to provide funding to help countries like Guyana and those in the Caribbean mitigate some of the effects, but that funding is still to be given to those countries. So on that premise, the government has said, you know, Guyana should go forward with the development of its resources, and despite the calls for there to be sort of a pause on its plans in the interest of lowering global temperatures. But how do you view this approach by the government?
Well, Guyana, I think that it's extremely irresponsible. It's dangerous. And of course, it's foolish. It may be self-serving for the government. Perhaps they're looking at the short-term oil revenue that's coming in over the term of this government. But it is utterly self-defeating for Guyana, and we already know that. Vice President Jagdeo has said that climate change is an existential threat. Why would a government do something that threatens the people of the country that they are supposed to be serving? Why would any government do anything to make climate change worse when they've already said it's an existential threat? Greenhouse gases from fossil fuels definitely make climate change worse. So, and this is real. It's there in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's real. And Vice President Jagdeo said in a meeting last year, we're not here to question the science. The science it's proven. Now, you asked about President Ali, and of course, he has also said that Guyana is particularly vulnerable to climate change. And that raises the same question. You're the president. You've been elected to serve the entire nation. And now you're promoting something that is dangerous for the people who trusted you and voted for you. And it's also dangerous for the people who didn't elect you. And so you don't really have a mandate from them. This is really not a good way for a government to behave. I think what we're seeing here is the oil curse, a government that wants to do oil no matter what the threat is to the country. Now, you mentioned the funding, that one of the reasons advanced, if I can call it a reason, one of the reasons advanced is that, well, the rich countries have done this and they promised to give Guyana money, and they're not giving Guyana any money, so Guyana should do the same thing. Of course, there are many, many problems with that, apart from the fact that it's a very embarrassing statement for any country to be running cap in hand to other countries. But let's just look at what that means. Guyana is a very rich country, and I'm going to come back later on in the program if we have the time and really explain to listeners and viewers why I say that Guyana is a very rich country. But let's just look at a couple of things. This country has had money. How much money was spent on Skeldon? How much money has been spent on Amelia Falls? How much money was spent on the Marriott Hotel? I don't need to go on. I mean, I think the viewers and listeners could probably produce a much, much better list than I can. We've had 50 years of economic mismanagement, 50 years of giving cheap deals to foreigners, Omai, Barama, Baishanlin. Again, the list is endless. We're very focused at the moment on the Esso deal, which of course is utterly atrocious. But we've had 50 years of giving, well, not quite 50 years actually. Let me rephrase that. We've had 50 years of economic mismanagement, and we've had about 25 to 30 years of these cheap deals for the foreigners, because this didn't happen until after 1985. And we also have very heavy taxes for the people of Guyana. So the people who own the resources get nothing because their resources are handed over cheap to foreigners. And then the people who own these resources, us, have to pay extremely high taxes. We're very, very highly taxed, considering how little people earn. You have a nurse who's struggling on a very small salary, but has to pay tax on almost everything. Even if she goes into the shop, she's got to buy food. Some food items carry VAT, and no, they're not supposed to, but people are struggling, but they have to pay tax. If you're a foreign company, you contribute absolutely nothing. You don't have to pay tax. ExxonMobil's subsidiary pays no tax. Hess, CNOOC, Nexen, all of them, they've been given these tax breaks, in addition to taking out 87.5% of Guyana's oil. So to say that we need to do oil in order to get money is a really foolish argument for the two reasons I've given. Three actually. One, that the government has wasted a lot of money. That's why we don't have it. Two, decades of economic mismanagement. And three, of course, this atrocious deal with Esso. And when the government was in opposition, we heard a lot of noise about how they were going to make things better. And now that they're in government, there is absolutely no sign of that. In fact, things are probably worse, as we saw with the granting of the Payara license against the wishes of the people in this country. Let's be absolutely clear about that. There was outrage when that was done, and that was done with the assistance of the Canadian government. And the Canadian government is very pro-oil and gas. They're facing protests all the time in Canada against oil and gas. And they come to Guyana and say, oh, you must be like us. Now, this leads in nicely to the development point, that we must have this money so that we can develop. Now, development is really an old-fashioned, out-of-date concept. It's a very foolish argument for any government to use. It's colonial. In the colonial era, countries like the United Kingdom and the European powers went to the rest of the world. They went to the Americas, they went to Asia, they went to Africa, smashed down people's societies, grabbed everything that they could, destroyed people's resources, exterminated wildlife, and said, well, this is we're going to make you civilized. In the post-colonial era, they can't do that. So they don't say we're going to make you civilized, they say we're going to help you to develop, but it's the same thing. They smash down people's cultures, they take people's resources. It doesn't look so different. And it's extraordinary for a government in 2021 to be talking about development. I mean, these so-called developed countries, the United States, Canada, Norway, the European states, they've exterminated biodiversity. They hardly have any. The United Kingdom has lost about 98% of its biodiversity. They've destroyed the climate with oil and gas and coal. They've made the ocean more acid. I mean, people don't always talk about the ocean, but another really massive problem is making the ocean more acid because the ocean is a carbon sink. And now they're hustling to cut their emissions. They're hustling to go renewable. They're hustling to do protected areas. They're hustling to do rewilding because now they are suffering. You're seeing floods in New York, floods in Germany, Canada is on fire. Before, when it was the global south, we were simply collateral damage. Now it's the global north. These governments are extremely worried. I'm actually, at the moment, I'm in Marseille in France, in the south of France, at something called the World Conservation Congress, which is the biggest in the world. And it's run by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and its members are sovereign states and conservation organizations and so on. The business sector is here as well. And I spoke at the opening plenary on rights and governance with the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights and the environment and the head of the Global Environmental Facility. And then I did a second event with the business sector. Everybody is worried. Every single person at this Congress knows that the Earth is on the edge of climate catastrophe. I mean, I think it's too late to talk about climate change. The global temperature has increased by 1 degree, and we are already seeing devastation across the planet. And the other big issue is that we are on the edge of biodiversity collapse. People are talking about the 6th mass extinction, except it's not an extinction in the normal sense. It's an extermination because of human activity. And there's a sense of urgency here. Now, Guyana is over 80% forested. It's rich in biodiversity. It's a carbon sink. It has massive renewable energy potential. This is massive wealth. This is what makes Guyana a climate leader. This is what potentially makes Guyana a model for the world to follow, and the government simply doesn't understand that. They're out of date. They don't understand the value of what we have, and they're squandering it. Literally squandering it. They've learned the bad habits from this is Western colonial thinking, that you smash down everything in order to get money. Now, our forests and biodiversity are immensely valuable. So the argument that, well, we need to do this in order to get money is completely unconvincing if you know anything about the way the world is moving now and the value of natural capital. And I can talk a bit about the natural capital, but I think we probably need to have a little break there.
Indeed, that was quite an interesting, multifaceted perspective that you put forward there. So thank you very much for that. But Ms. Jackie, you know, what I'd also like to get from you is just also your thinking on another perception where there's some people who believe that Guyana is already a net carbon sink and we're already paying our fair share. So on that backdrop, there's a belief that we would not be a significant contributor to the climate change crisis with the development of our 9 billion barrels of oil equivalent resources. What is your take on that?
Well, I think that's completely daft, to be honest. It's more than 9 billion barrels of oil. And if you just do the standard multiplication that the United States Environmental Protection Agency does, you end up with close to 4 billion barrels of oil 4 billion tons of greenhouse gas from Guyana's oil. And that's not an option. That's a carbon bomb. That's about 10 times California's emissions. There is no way that Guyana is going to be allowed to do this. And I think people need to realize that right now the world has changed and governments, they're seeing what's happening in the global north. They're not going to allow someone in the global south now to undo all of the work that the global north has now realized that it's got to do to catch up. I mean, it's their responsibility. Let's be absolutely frank. It's the responsibility of the global north economies to remove the greenhouse gas that they have put into the atmosphere and which have endangered life across the planet. And that's the starting point. But that doesn't mean that Guyana should now join them and behave badly. Guyana has a different role, which is to say, we are taking this greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. You must pay us for it. Now, the other problem, of course, is the government has no idea how to run a business. And they shouldn't be running a business, in fact, because that's not the job of governments, but they want to do it. So they cut this ridiculous deal with the Norwegians. And I think that Guyana's carbon sink removal was priced at about $5 in 2014, and that it was low even in 2014. But the price has shot up. The IMF says it's now $75 a ton for greenhouse gas. That's what Guyana should be looking at, and that money should go into protecting the forests. It should not go into vanity projects. It should be used specifically for the forests, and you increase the forest, and therefore you are increasing your resource and you're going to get more money because you're being paid for the service. Personally, I don't like the business model. I think we should just protect the forest because it makes sense to do it. But we are where we are, and we are stuck in a global economy with people who want to see money for everything. But that's the way to do it, not oil, because that is a massive cost on the country. Because don't forget, we're going to be, if Guyana continues down this road and emits 4 billion tons of greenhouse gas, we'll multiply that by $75 a ton and see how much Guyana would have to pay in order to do oil. Because that's coming. Carbon tax is coming. The fossil fuel sector is trying to delay it as long as they can, and then they will shift the cost onto the host country. So Guyana will end up paying. Guyana pays everything under the deal anyway. So it's simply going to cost the country more in order to get what? Couple $100 million this year, couple $100 million next year. I mean, really, we're talking about small amounts of money compared to what Guyana could be earning if the government was to take a sensible approach, rather than to be so completely overexcited about going into oil.
Indeed. Ms. Janke, I also wanted to get from you, do you get the impression that there seems to be now an unbridled loyalty to the oil industry, especially at a time where we've seen so many agencies, the International Energy Agency and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, calling for countries to turn to renewables? But there seems to be a different agenda in Guyana. Do you get the impression that there's an unbridled loyalty to the industry, and where do you think that may leave us?
I certainly think that the government has put the interests of the oil sector above the interests of the people of Guyana. I don't think anyone is going to quibble with that. The interesting question is, why are they doing it? Why would any government pursue such a foolish policy? And I think that's something that people have to ask the government. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know why they're doing it. People say and do strange things. I mean, Jan Mangal, who was the former advisor to the president, came out so heavily in favor of gas to shore, which is another unmitigated disaster in the making. But perhaps he thought that that was a good thing. So I think really when people behave in this strange way, you have to ask them what is their motive. In terms of Exxon's influence, I think the reality is that whenever you have an oil company and you have a host country, the oil company has a very dominating impact. And of course, Exxon does have an enormous influence on the country. Everywhere, every day, the Exxon and the government are trying to persuade people that oil is viable. Clearly, it is not viable. And, it's in your face. I mean, Exxon, if you were going to do a poster of a failing fossil fuel sector, Exxon would be the poster child. in 2014, their share price was $102. In 2021, it's $54. It's lost half of its value. Why would you take a failing company as a partner to build your country's future on? They've been kicked out of the Dow Jones Index. The New York Times said that last month said that Exxon lost $22.4 billion in 2020. That's not a success story. And it wasn't because of COVID. This is a really interesting thing. COVID has been used to blame all kinds of things, but according to the New York Times, Exxon had to write down over $19 billion worth of assets because those assets were not viable. Well, what were they? Gas assets. So this is a company that invested in worthless assets, and it cost their shareholders $19 billion. The market capitalization was $500 billion in 2008. It's $232 billion now. That's less than half. It's actually smaller than Home Depot, which is a home improvement store. This used to be the biggest company in the world. This is not a success story.
I just want to go back to a project that you mentioned. That's the gas to energy project. And I believe it was last year that you had sent President Ali a list of studies that he should be pursuing before moving forward with that project. Some of them on the environmental side and as well touching on the economics of it. But I don't believe any of those studies that you asked him to get done before pursuing this project were even started. In light of that, do you believe we are walking a dangerous path with this project in the absence of these key studies?
Oh, of course. But I want to say up front that I consider this project to be illegal. That's my view. I think it's illegal, and I don't think that any amount of studies will make it legal. Of course, it would still be a good idea to have these studies. And the reason I think it's illegal is if you read the petroleum agreement, it says that Esso, well, it's the three of them, Esso, CNOOC, Nexen, and Hess, all three subsidiaries. I'll use Esso because it's easier. The petroleum agreement says that they will re-inject the gas. If you read the environmental impact assessment, it's 1,500 pages of gobbledygook. It's written so that it's difficult to read. Nevertheless, the environmental impact assessment says in multiple places that Esso will re-inject gas, and this is very specific. It's Esso because it's Esso's EIA. Environmental impact permit said that Esso would re-inject gas. That's before the permit, and in my view, this so-called modification of the permit by the EPA, I think that's illegal as well. And then I think it's important to look at why we have a gas problem now. And of course, the reason is that Esso isn't re-injecting. They're flaring. Well, why are they flaring? Well, because they're using faulty equipment. Well, how do we know they're using faulty equipment? Well, because they said so. I mean, they use all kinds of technical jargon to confuse people, or they turn around and they dodge the issue and say it's complicated. But basically, simply, they're using faulty equipment. And I think that's a breach of the permit. I mean, I think that's illegal as well, because the Environmental Protection Act says you have to use the most appropriate technology, and there is no way that using faulty equipment is an appropriate thing to do. So they're not re-injecting the gas because they can't re-inject the gas. They've actually flared over 15 billion standard cubic feet of gas up to July, which is extremely bad for the climate. So you have this situation where they've got this gas and they have to get rid of it. I think they're in breach of the contract. The government's not enforcing the contract. The EPA is not enforcing the environmental permit. They went and they modified it. As I said, I think it's probably illegal. We're ending up with the gas. Guyana doesn't need that gas. And no one should say that Guyana needs that gas. We don't need that gas. We've got far better options. And if you look at what's going on now, the two World Bank economists, I mean, I've said this so many times, Nick Stern and Joseph Stiglitz, and they've been saying that if you want to build back after COVID-19, you've got to go renewable. You have to know the global energy market, and it's moving away from fossil fuels. There's just no way to get around that. I mentioned the $19 billion worth of stranded assets that Exxon's had to write down. Well, what's going to happen to the infrastructure that Guyana is going to have to build? So Guyana's going to have to pay for the pipeline, because under this deal, Guyana pays for everything. And we should stop calling it a gas to energy project, actually, because the SO part of it is to bring it to shore. And all of that depends on the government putting in proper infrastructure. Well, we don't have a very good track record of governments putting in good infrastructure in this country. We're constantly redoing and repairing. And maybe the biggest infrastructure project was probably Selden in recent times, or perhaps the proposed Near Falls. So you have a situation where Guyana then has to invest in all this infrastructure, which makes absolutely no sense at all. It's going to cost billions. I know they're putting out numbers. They're going to say, 900 million or something ridiculous for the pipeline. It's going to be far more than that. Costs are going up all of the time. And what will happen is that Guyana will be left with stranded assets. This thing needs 20 years to show a profit, if it would ever show profit, and actually it won't. Let's just think about this from a different perspective, because the rationale is this will bring you cheap electricity.
Yes.
I mean, do you really think, Guyanese people strip in there, that we're going to spend millions and billions to give people cheap electricity? And we're only talking about people on the coast, because all of the communities in the hinterland will have to have some other form of energy. So it's going to be a disaster. And the reason they don't produce any studies, I think, is that the government cannot produce a study that shows that this thing is viable. If it's viable, if I am wrong, then just put it out there in the public arena. Just produce the evidence. Just give it to the people of Guyana. Why all the secrecy? If I'm wrong about the gas to shore project, me and all the other financial experts and the global energy market experts, and the economists and the two World Bank economists, then tell us. Incidentally, the World Bank themselves produced a report a few years ago saying there was no domestic gas market in Guyana. Little or no domestic gas market. So a number of hurdles to get over.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Janke. Now, I'd like to take you to another perspective, also on the issue of gas. It's been said by some that gas would be used as a bridge to the clean energy transition. However, there are many policy leaders who believe that gas cannot be used as a bridge anymore because we missed that opportunity. It's now, if you continue to pursue it, it would be a wall to the energy transition. What are your thoughts on that?
I sometimes feel that we're stuck in a time warp in Guyana, that whatever was last year's fashion, that's what we're going to do. Gas is not a bridge. It hasn't been a bridge for a very long time. This is an oil industry line. And even the oil industry is giving up on it. But as I said, Exxon had to write off these gas assets. If it was ever a bridge, that bridge has collapsed. Gas is over. It's rapidly becoming a stranded asset. And the International Energy Agency has said there should be no new fossil fuel projects. Now, they're not saying that necessarily because they're concerned about the environment. They're saying that because this is a waste of money, and to keep on investing in an asset that will never return any money is actually not investing in an asset. It's a waste of money. The other issue about the bridge is that there is nothing to bridge. Guyana's using this really nasty heavy fuel oil. Just get rid of it. We can move to 100% renewable energy almost overnight, and that is exactly what we should do. It's cheap. We're well placed to do solar power. Now, I hear a lot of stuff about, the technology isn't there. Of course, the technology is there. It's just that we bring in up-to-date technology. We go hand to agencies like the World Bank and ask for projects, and we get whatever it is that they don't want in the first world. If you can conceive of energy in a different way, there is no reason why we can't have new energy infrastructure that's very small. So every community in this country could have its own mini grid. You don't need to have a big national grid anymore, because energy doesn't come from one single source that then has to be distributed to anywhere else. The sun shines on everybody. You could put up solar systems in this country and give everybody cheap electricity, which is unlimited, because the sun is there. It's going to come up every single day and it's going to shine. We happen to live in a place with a great deal of sunshine. We have hydropower if we want it, but I don't think we should bother. Certainly not big hydropower projects, because those are very destructive. So I think Amelia Falls is another really silly idea. So the alternatives are to break up the grid, to have smaller community grids and let everybody maintain their electricity. And you don't need to charge them anything for it. Just put in the infrastructure for free instead of wasting it on gas to shore pipelines and gas infrastructure. There is gas is not a bridge, it's an obstacle.
Thank you very much for that viewpoint, Ms. Janke. And now I'd like to ask you for your concluding thoughts on the President and Vice President's management of the oil industry after 1 year in office.
Well, it's not exactly a success story, is it? We wouldn't be having these conversations over and over if they were doing the right thing. I don't think that they understand the global energy market. They've shown no indication that they have the best interests of the people at heart in this. And it's extremely worrying that they would be prepared to squander Guyana's wealth in pursuit of something as worthless as fossil fuels. I think it's very, very worrying that they're not enforcing the legislation and that they are not making the EPA enforce the legislation. Again, that's costing us money. Let me give you an example. The EPA recently said that there's no need for an environmental impact assessment for Esso's exploration in the Kanji. This is a 12-well project now. They're going to be drilling. And I don't know if they're going to be doing seismic mapping, which consists of setting off, basically setting off guns and using the sound to determine what's there. Of course, this is an absolute disaster for whales. And I think, again, this is another illegal decision. But anyway, so Esso could be making whales deaf or killing them, because sound can actually kill them. And this is going to have an impact on whale populations, of course. Now, this isn't simply about we all love whales and therefore we don't want them to be killed, although that ought to be the starting point. The point here is that whales are actually extremely valuable. If we go back to this idea of ecosystem service, and I told you I particularly like it, but that's as far as we've got. The carbon sequestration carried out by whales over their lifetime is valued at about $2 million. You have to factor that in. All of the environmental destruction that is taking place in Guyana at the moment is taking place because the government does not understand that what we have is valuable. This is called natural capital, and it should be valued. If you read section, I think it's section 443 of the Environmental Protection Act, it says that the agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, must produce physical accounts in accordance with modern accounting standards to record the natural capital of Guyana. That was in there 1996. 25 years ago. I put that in 25 years ago. Now, at the time, it's visionary, but 25 years later, they still haven't done it. And that is why successive governments have been making very bad economic decisions. And that's why we're still hearing talk about development and having to go to foreign countries and ask them for money.
Understood. Ms. Janke, thank you very much for your perspectives. It really is a pleasure to have you on our programs. We do hope that you enjoy your time in France and that the Congress, continues to be an enlightening one for you, great experience. To our viewers and our listeners, thank you once again for joining us on Governance, Corruption, and Justice. We look forward to having you back with us, same time, same place next week. Ms. Janke, once again, thank you and have a wonderful night.
Thank you very much, Guyana. Good night, everyone. And